Turn around here, guys. That was absolutely stunning, guys. Wow. I can feel it. Yeah. It made me think of the Navajo blessing way prayer, to walk in beauty always, because there's nothing but beauty to be walked in. So thank you. And thank you all for being here. Thank you for holding a space for me. I think Laura was wondering, like, when did this guy first start showing up? It was about 8 years ago. We aren't quite sure how I got here, but I got here somehow. There's a strange background story there. But what I haven't ever told you about is what preceded my arrival here. And it's time to talk about that. It's been alluded to that I've been on a pilgrimage for a while. And it actually started with a power dream, a prophetic dream. If you're a Jungian psychology kind of person, it's what Carl Jung called a big dream, which is very funny because he made words up and I thought he could come up with something better than a big dream. But it was a big dream. And I was standing on the edge of a giant cliff, and off to the right there was a nice gentle slope that I knew I could walk down, but I also knew that that was not my path. I knew in this dream that my path was over the top of the cliff. And I knew that I only was aware of the first 3 handholds, and that the rest was going to be an arduous downward climb that would have to be figured out as I climbed down. I also knew that at the bottom of the cliff was a cavern. And then when I arrived at the cavern, my task was to enter the cavern, inhabit the cavern, and be, and here's the words, embodied by what was in the cavern. And that great things would come to pass, and they would find their way out of the cavern into the world beyond. Now, if you're a Jungian person, you go like, oh yeah, that's like totally a Jungian dream. The cavern, of course, represents the soul, the psyche, the whole being that we are, that we have lost along the way. If you prefer, we could say that the cavern represents unity, oneness, wholeness, and we can suggest that is deep down within us and has been all the while, because Jesus told us the kingdom of heaven is within you, and that was not merely metaphor. And I experienced it. And I've been on a pilgrimage ever since. Now, if you happen to like A Course in Miracles, by the way, I have a friend who says it's actually A Course in Miracle. There's only one miracle. The book is mistitled. Now you know. The miracle is at one-ment, atonement, coming back into alignment with all that is oneness, wholeness, unity, call it what you will. I love part of the introduction, the way you all do this. It's like it doesn't matter what you call it because it doesn't care what we call it. Whatever it is above our opinion of it. So coming back into atonement. Now, last time I was here, I actually showed you a gesture that had come to me, beginning with Namaste, which you all know. Of course, I salute the light, the beauty, the wonder, the spirit, the glory, whatever you want to call it, right? In you. And what I suggested was what had been shown to me is that spirit that is within you is likewise in me, is likewise in all things, and therefore I suggested this. And if we channel some old Protestant knowledge, I and the Father are one, thou and the Father are one, all that is one with the Father, therefore we come into unity, into communion, into union, into oneness, into wholeness together, because it's always all together and always has been and never has not been. And then I suggested this. Now, if you're a yoga practitioner, you're going to say, that looks a lot like the sun salutation, right? Like, look at this. Well, of course, because if there's only one, everything is reflective of the one. So why wouldn't yoga reflect that? Why wouldn't yoga be demonstrating unity? Here's the problem, though. I also talked a little bit about this last time. It's a little bit of a revisitation, and then I'm going to shift gears to the new stuff that I want to share with you. The problem is, in the words of the American philosopher Ken Wilber, that we find flatland. So we go from this to this. It happens when they cut you off in traffic. And you know you ought to say, bless you, but it's like, that's not what you say. Me either. It happens every time you hear the political rhetoric. It happens every time there's problems in the world. It can get really, really proximal and close if someone in your family, in your world, in your community is somehow or another perpetrated, victimized, damaged, etc. It can get deeply entrenched in us. So talking about this, talking about unity, is merely talking because we're experiencing flatland. It's the realm of trauma, trauma with a capital T, trauma with a small t. Small t trauma is, you've been told all your life there's something wrong with you. It's traumatizing. So we get flatlanded. And the challenge with the flatland is it takes us out of remembering that there is not and never has been and never can be separation, because we're not experiencing that. We're experiencing that person who cut us off in traffic. So, if it gets really entrenched, and I had an experience with a woman in Santa Fe some years ago when I was on book tour. She came up, and we were talking about forgiveness. She came up after my talk and book stuff. She came up and she said, Ron, we need to talk because I have a forgiveness problem. And I said, tell me. She said, well, a few years ago, my sister was brutally murdered by someone. And I've been visiting that person in prison now for several years because I cannot let it go. I have to find a way to forgiveness. And what I've found is that I now understand his story and have extraordinary compassion for why he's the damaged being that he is. He was stolen from his indigenous community. He was moved to another community where he was the outlier amongst all the people. He had some difficulties as well. The result is the violence inflicted upon him, you all know this, was inflicted outward. My sister paid the ultimate price. And I have so much compassion for this guy. I so understand what happened to him. And it's devastating, and I can't forgive him because the loss is so great to me. And I said, that's the power place. You know the line Jesus says about it profiteth you nothing to pray for your friends? That's because it's those deep, devastating, difficult places in the flatland that all the opportunity is. And of course, we don't want to go there because that would require us to do some things we really don't want to do, like forgive people we don't want to forgive, for example. So therein lies our challenge. Now, the part I want to add to the things I've talked about before about my pilgrimage is a practice called somatic experiencing. I don't know who's heard that. It actually comes out of some work from the Tibetan world, some Tibetan Buddhism in this. But let me tell you what it represents. The proposition is that we don't reach enlightenment, we don't reach wholeness, we don't reach oneness, we don't reach forgiveness, we don't reach any of that stuff in our thoughts, that it must be experienced to be held. We are somatic beings, we were born that way. The problem is we live in a cognitive world. You got an ego, congratulations. We're living in a world that is very corporeal, material, all that stuff. And so there's this whole background of experiencing that many of us have managed to avoid for our entire lives. More so in some cases for men than women, just to be honest. There is a real difference there. So here's what these guys are suggesting. They're suggesting that that right brain we talk about that is creative isn't just a creative brain. It is hooked into your entire autonomic nervous system. Meaning it's being driven by everything from the feelings in your fingers to the breeze upon your face. And that everything is connected to everything. We're finding this out genetically. Genetically, there are trace elements in your DNA from the very first creature that crawled out of the slime. Somewhere deep down, all of life, all of creation, all of spirit, this is what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. It's all there, always has been. And it's all on the other side of our thoughts, our thinking, the way we hold on to stuff. And we're being invited with somatic experiencing to bypass all of that and have the experience of oneness. Not the cognitive thought of unity, but the actual physical embodied experience in the cavern of thyself, where you will experience oneness, and as a result, you will never forget it. And there's only one power, one only, one everything, even though it looks separate, right? So here's what they suggest, and I should say I suggest, because I've been practicing this for a while now. What they suggest is that we might want to push past the way we hold stuff. It's wonderful, the practices we have that hold us in good places. They're encouraging us to go to places that are disquieting and uncomfortable. For example, in my case, I was having a good laugh with someone on Friday about this. I am 18 months into a de-importancing practice, because it turns out I got a childhood imprint about how it's important to be important, and that is how I would navigate the world, and so I've been importancing my whole life. I'm 67 now, so I'm 65 and a half, a year and a half away from making myself to be important. But as I experienced that, which is very disquieting, letting go of the way you've identified yourself for your entire life. It's deeply disturbing stuff, because you're left with what they in recovery call the hole in the donut. Well, if I'm not important, then what? It's deeply disturbing. And the ego will yank us back and go, well, write another book, Ron. You can be important that way. But we've had these experiences. I know you have. You've had that moment. Sometimes it will happen in a good song like that one, guys, where suddenly something happens and you're swept up in something. And then, of course, you lose it when a guy like me starts talking. You might have seen this when you saw a child pop out of your partner's womb. Isn't the womb the perfect metaphor for oneness? It's a perfect metaphor for it. And then we're cast out into the earth. And all of a sudden, it doesn't feel right, which is what we carry with us as birth trauma, some might call it. You may have had an experience like I've had of being somewhere in the natural world and suddenly being catapulted into gobsmacked. That moment where you go like, oh my God. It even happens sometimes online. Have you ever seen one of those cosmos things where they zero in on the earth and then they start distancing away, and before long, you're 450 trillion years away from your home here on planet Earth, and you're going like, wow, this is like really amazing. I am so small, and yet I am part of the entirety of the cosmos. Wayne Lickerman, who wrote a book called The Way of Powerlessness, said that we are simultaneously wave and ocean, and you cannot separate us from the two. We are one at all times, but we think we're a separate wave. That's flatland again. So somatic experiencing, which is what I wanted to share just a little bit about, is the process, and we're actually going to meditate on this just a little bit, and we'll practice some of that this afternoon in the workshop for those who are interested. Just know it's disturbing to start letting go of yourself. You're going to feel like you're dying, because you are, and something else is being birthed. So what we would suggest is if there's a flow of spirit, always and ever, constantly beaming at us, we can visualize in our meditations what it's like to swim up that flow stream. We can use creative imagination to start seeing what happens. And sometimes what presents itself is generational trauma, or the damage that came to you when you were victimized as a child, or the stuff that's presently going on in your political landscape that is deeply disturbing and distressing to you, or the partner who just won't do what you know they're supposed to do because they're not going to do what you want them to do. And at each of those, you're going to be asked to let those go. And then you're going to get deeper and you're going to go like, but if I'm not a singer, who am I to be? If I'm not a music director, then like, what? If I'm not a mother, a grandmother, a father, a grandfather, then what? And that is what we're asked to give up. And what lies on the other side of the letting go is more and more realization of oneness. And just like in the cavern dream, and this is my experience, the more we let go of those blocks to experiencing and being embodied by oneness, the more the oneness pours through us. There are two scriptures, and they're going to meditate. One of them is you can't pour new wine into old wineskins, which as a recovering alcoholic I find particularly interesting. What they're telling us is those old ideas, those old ways we hold to ourselves, they're going to have to be released because something new cannot find you. Greater oneness cannot find you. And then, of course, the beauty of another one, another scripture, you simply cannot hide a light under a basket. That when the stuff starts pouring forth, you just can't contain it. You just need to know it's not going to be what you thought it was going to be. It never is what we thought it was going to be. So I'd like to invite you into that flow for just a few minutes. And I'll offer a few gentle thoughts. Most of you know about meditating, so you can settle in and wiggle your toes and move your hips and whatever, so you can settle for just a few minutes. And then with your creative imagination, find some place that feels impossibly idyllic. It just feels good. Find it in your body. Solar plexus, pit of your belly, chest. Now with a simple breath, blow it away. And come back to your body and notice what rises. And breathe into what rises. If it feels wonderful or if it feels terrible, with a long, slow breath, breathe that away. And see what rises. Find it in your body. Breathe into it. And no matter how it feels, breathe it away. See if you can find emptiness in your body. And with your breath, breathe that away too. Notice your feet. Wiggle your toes. Know that you are the cavern. You are unity embodied. And it's just simply waiting for you to experience it. And now I say namaste. And as it is in you, you can't not be unity.